Okay.
I was working at the BBC and I just qualified as a proper studio manager. And almost the next weekend, I didn't feel very well. I was living together with Len and Robert Young in a rather wet basement flat up near Camden Town in Kentish Town. So, and it was my turn to go home anyway to see Mum and Dad. So I went home. I woke up the following morning and didn't feel at all well, and got on my hands and knees on the bed and then vomited a whole gout of red blood. My mother fainted. The called 999, etc. And my father came. And I was carted off to the Worsley Hospital as an emergency case. And then, a few days later, I've forgotten how long, I was diagnosed as having a serious illness. They tended to be a bit quiet about infectious diseases at that time. But at any rate, I'd been in the Worsley Hospital, which was an emergency hospital, for a couple of days when they sent me to the hospital where I was diagnosed. I was told that I had TB. It was a hospital in the region of Stourbridge. In Stourbridge, you went up a hill. Over the top of the hill, you could see Clent Hills, Kinver, the country. It's now a protected area, of natural beauty, and it was then. So I found myself in a bed in a bow-shaped ward. They called them pavilions, on the forward slope of a moderately steep hill, facing south, facing the sun all day. There were half a dozen so-called pavilions with open fronts. That is, they had just wooden supports and big windows which they could completely open up and pull back. Fresh air was considered to be one of the requirements for amelioration, if not a cure, of TB. And they also had, somewhere on the grounds, wooden huts of raw wood painted in creosote inside and out, because the smell of creosote was thought to be good to breathe in by people with infectious diseases, particularly with tuberculosis. So I was settled in, facing south, immediately to the left of the central part of this bow-shaped pavilion building. On my right was the central office, which was the medical office, where the doctor in charge of the ward or pavilion had his headquarters, and also it was the headquarters of the nurses, several of whom were male nurses. And so I settled in. I didn't feel any pain or any symptoms, really. That's part of my medical history. I tend not to feel symptoms. And I was fairly happy. It was a new experience. I didn't think, Jesus, I've got TB. I thought, hey, this is quite interesting. I'm in a hospital. We're perfectly comfortable. Len came to visit me often enough, and my parents came, and Len brought a record player and some discs. So I was able to, and some cans that I could put on my ears, so I could listen to orchestral music. I liked country and western music then, so I was able to indulge in it. And I got to know the members of the pavilion quite well. the most sick person was a young guy with round glasses and a vacant-looking face who couldn't read or write. And that wasn't unusual in those days to meet members of the working classes anywhere, but this is Staffordshire, the Midlands, or at least into Worcestershire, who couldn't read or write. So they used to sign with a cross, witnessed as being by this person. And I made friends with a man who was a fairground showman. There was also a booth boxer who had worked in a circus and was paid £5 if he could knock out anybody that challenged him. I remember him clearly. He had a broken nose and walked around quite a lot with his old-fashioned dressing gown on, stopping, and it was the regular walk up and down the ward that we all did, stopping at certain beds, asking how they were, commenting on things like the weather and football, the news, and passing on. I settled in and quickly became used to the population. It was a different sort of population there from what I'd been used to in a hospital in, for example, Wordsley. They were all established characters of the working class. The boxer with his broken nose and his common dressing gown. And there was a clever guy also who was in a way the leader of the ward, who was a very intelligent guy, but also of the working class. I didn't make much of a friendship with him. At the bottom of the road, a road ran to the right past the creosote huts down to the bottom of the hill where the main medical building was. And there also was the patient's recreation centre, which had a full-size billiard table. It had a cafe. You could ask questions of the doctor. You could make appointments. You could meet your visitors there if you wanted to, rather than take them up to the ward, the pavilion, I should say. So life settled down to a quite interesting series of discoveries about my medical condition.
Did they tell you you had TB?
Yes, but after I'd been there for a week, I think they let me stew in anxiety, really, because when I was going back home that weekend on a Friday night, I met a guy that I'd known at school who qualified to be a doctor, and he said most people who bleed these days from the lungs have cancer. So, of course, when I woke up following morning vomiting red blood all over the sheets, I thought, that's it, I've got cancer. And they didn't immediately tell me that I had TB. I had to wait until I got to the sanatorium to discover that. And then we were all on a special diet. It was rationing. It was 1956 or 57. There was rationing in process, but we all had good, solid, nutritional meals. Always protein, fish or meat, vegetables, potatoes, cakes. It was like living in a fairly posh motor hotel, because it was clean. Every day they swept it out and mopped the floor, and every day the nurses walked around and took your temperature every morning. Every evening they took your temperature as well. and they just kept a record of it hanging on a bed, on a plank attached to the end of the bed. And then I was fortunate enough, each of these cubicles, they're called, had two beds. They were divided by wooden partitions into two bedrooms, two bed half rooms, and I had an empty bed to my left, and that's where I put my electric equipment, mainly my gramophone record player. And I think I enjoyed talking to the people because I'd never met them before. And I remember saying to either Len or my mother, ever since I've never experienced local people, because I left home at 18 from attending the grammar school, every morning catching the number 9 bus to Dudley and walking up St James's Road to the grammar school, of which I was the head boy 2 years running. So I was a successful pupil, and I had high scores academically, and I was a sportsman. I was the captain of football, the captain of cricket, the captain of badminton, the captain of field sports, and the head prefect. And the prefects were up a flight of steps, wooden stairs, in quite a high room overlooking the main stairs to the exit from the grammar school. The first, when you got to the bottom of the stairs, there was a junction. You turned straight on, you went into the rest of the school, turn left, and on your left was a school hall. Every morning there was an assembly and prayers and hymns, and a prefect nominated reading a lesson. I've read the lesson quite a number of times. But back in the sanatorium, I think I was quite popular. Unfortunately, one of the head nurse was a male, and I think he was queer. I know he was queer, but of course it didn't mean much to me then. I didn't know. I had no experience of that kind of unnatural sexual interest. So he was quite an interesting man. I think he came from North Staffordshire somehow. And then he used to make a habit of massaging my bare feet stuck out the bottom of the bed. And that's when I realized that something wasn't quite right, because he would rub my feet in a way that would make me relax. And then before finishing, he would hurry off to the lavatory. And I think he used to masturbate. But that realization only came to me quite later on. And thereafter, I avoided his ministrations as much as possible. I had a particular friend there who was a fairground showman who had the concession in Pat Collins' circus for a roll-em-down pennies, which is a circular stall. Somebody is in the middle, and on each cheese cut section there was a roll-down ramp, and you rolled your coin, and it went onto the surface, which had square numbers which were big enough to accommodate a coin. And if your coin settled on one of these without touching any of the edges of the square, the guy would pay you 5 pence or something for every penny you spent. And this was the regular income that my friend had. His wife was a rather strong woman who came in every week, reported on the business they were doing in the circus. I didn't make great friends with her. She would come and say hello, but Freddie, I'd go and every day I would go and sit by his bed, and he caused the biggest event to me, really, of my stay at the sanatorium near the end of my stay there, because the doctor saw my record on the bottom of the bed and at a certain point interviewed me and said, your TB is quiescent now, but it's caused scars on the inside of your lungs on the left-hand side, which can crack if you exert yourself. So I can discharge you now, he said, but what will happen if you run around or drink too much or whatever, one of these scars might crack and you're back having TB again, because the trapped bacilli of the TB will leak out from under the scars. What do you want to do? I can offer you an operation to remove the top left half of your lung. Think about it. So I went to Freddie. Freddie, by this time, who was really a chronic case. He'd had it the whole war, the whole Second World War. He'd been in a sanatorium, and he had instead of lungs on the X-ray, he called them milk bottles, because they were cloudy and streaked with tuberculosis bacilli. And I would look at his, for example, he showed me all of his X-rays that he had collected, and I would interpret them and say, this is where it's happening, etc. And I also noticed that he was getting a bit better. The mist in front of his lungs was clearing up a bit in patches. But then, fatally, the doctor noticed a press cutting that had been sent to Freddie, which he stuck on the side of his cubicle behind his bed, which said, "The end of the white scourge." And it was from a Canadian newspaper, which announced the arrival of a new drug called oxymycin, I think, which could...
Streptomycin?
Oxymycin.
Streptomycin or
Well, streptomycin, we had Pasanina. Streptomycin was the regular therapy. PAS and streptomycin, PAS, and the other one. So there was the doctor explained to me that a cocktail of treatment was better than one drug.
Yeah.
So it was streptomycin, two other drugs, water, rotated. Yeah. Freddie had this thing, a new drug. The enterprising doctor, the head of the medical section, wrote to the doctor named in this press release in Canada. The doctor sent him a whole bunch, a kind of year's supply of this drug from Canada to try out on his own patients. And of course the person that qualified for that was Freddie Clough himself. And I, at this point, got involved with Freddie because he wanted to know how he was doing, and I could see he was getting slightly better and so forth. Then it came my catastrophe or apotheosis or whatever you call it, when the doctor said, I'll discharge you now if you want to go, but you'll always be slightly an invalid, and you'll always have to watch yourself. There was a man in the ward, I think his name was Shipton, who showed occasionally showed the scar he had from a similar operation to the one that was being prescribed for me, which on his bare back was this huge scar from the base of his neck right round to the bottom of his ribs, a big scar. And that was the operation that opened him up, shortened some of his ribs, and took out a whole section of his lungs. The experience of the doctors said that the lungs grew in a way to fill the gap, so it wasn't so you could still breathe easily. It wasn't removing too much. It was just removing a bad section of your body, like a rotten bit of your apple. But still, I knew what it looked like, and I knew what I was in for. And I said to the doctor, "I'll let you know." But he said, "Well, by this time, I'd spent maybe about 11 or 12 months lying in bed. Bed rest was one of the cures too. So he got me up. Every day I went for a walk. And then Len did something which had a bad outcome. He gave me a revolver. Len and I were both members of the 18th Para in Birmingham. And Len bought a Webley pistol and ammunition and brought it into the hospital and gave it to me, and I kept it in a drawer by my bed. Dad thought it was highly dangerous, but of course I didn't take any notice of him saying that. And occasionally, now that I could walk, I'd go out with a couple of companions with the revolver and the ammunition, and I'd shoot at the trees, bang, bang. Gunshots in the country in those days were fine because a lot of landowners had shotguns and hunted rabbits. But I had this revolver. Then, in due course, I went to Bromsgrove Hospital for the operation, and I was quite willing now to have this big scar.
Wait a minute. So if you hadn't had the operation, you would always risk catching tuberculosis and scars.
The
alternative was to have the operation and have a reduced lung capacity.
And I decided to have the operation and settle my mind.
All right.
Accept the scar and everything. Foolish, really. I should just have said, I'll get better without it. I had no experience, really. I was in my 20s. And then time came, I went to the Bromsgrove Hospital for the operation. They put a catheter down my throat and looked in my lung. And then, thank God, a couple of days later comes the surgeon and says, "We're not going to operate. We think you'll be all right. The scars you've got are not vital. They're shallow. So we think you'll be all right. So we'll discharge you." Unfortunately then, in came Freddie Clough. He'd got better enough under the application of this Canadian drug to come for an operation on his lungs to remove a section of his lungs. Incidentally, when I had my decision to make, Freddie was on this drug, this Canadian drug, and I said to him, "I'm thinking, I think I'll have to go to this operation." He said, "Don't go. You can have some of my drug." And he was willing to take his share of the Canadian drug and give it to me every day.
Right.
So he was a true friend, a true friend. I saw him in the hospital, but I was at liberty, you know. I went home.
Did you take some of that medicine that he gave you?
I didn't, no.
You didn't.
I thought the nurse himself brought me. Said,
Yeah.
"I can give you, never mind about Freddie, I can give you some of the message. It's in a safe in the office down at the bottom of the hill. I can give you," and I said, "No, I don't want it."
Right.
because it would seem to me to be dishonest. And also, by this time, I didn't trust this guy's motives. So I didn't have any of that Canadian drug. Then I went back and Freddie died.
Oh dear.
Under the surgeon's knife. He couldn't survive the operation.
So he took that operation that you were going to have?
Yes. He was going to have the cutting. He was going to have his part of his lungs taken out.
But if his whole lungs were affected, that would have been a big operation, right?
It was considered a big operation, but a lot of people shrugged and took it. You know, in those days.
I mean, would it have made a difference to him, even if
it would have meant that I was. No. From then on, I would have been whatever I was doing. I was going to. I was going to Oxford. No, I didn't know whether I'd been to Oxford.
Well, you just said that you were going to go back to the BBC.
Yes, that's right. I was going back to the BBC.
Did the BBC hold the job for you then?
The BBC would take me back, but only at the same bureaucratic number that I'd left. So I decided to try somewhere else. And
is that when you left for the Rank organisation?
I went to the Rank organisation because Lynn and I had decided that we wanted to be in the film business.
Okay, but hang on. What's the timing here? Because you said you were 3 years at the BBC and then you joined the Rank organisation.
Yes, I
just started.
I left the hospital, left the sanatorium. My treatment was complete. I had a whole chest. I was set to go back. I wrote to the BBC and they said, yes, you're welcome back, but we can't give you a grade higher than the one that you had when you retired. So I thought, screw that. They should give me a bigger. I'd been away for a year and a half probably. And I lived long enough and I was experienced enough to join the BBC at a higher rank. So I went for a trainee application at the Rank organisation and got in. I was one of 4 or 5 trainees out of 2,000 applicants. So I did well on my tests for the Rank organisation. I was put into head office.
Sorry, you also said that you will take the Rank organisation tomorrow maybe, but just to go back to the tuberculosis thing, were you in danger of dying at any point?
No, I don't think so. It never occurred to me.
Were there young people like you?
Yeah, there were a lot of people were a bit older than me, I thought. But also they seemed older because they were common people, working class, and they were worn at the edges. You know, you could tell they'd had a life. I had fun. I won while I was at the sanatorium. I won a competition, a fancy dress competition. Somewhere there's a picture of me dressed as I call myself a Martian missionary. I had a big hat with lots of tow, which was used for stuffing bleeding wounds and stuff. Also for stuffing beds. Tow was in fact unraveled rope strands. So I covered myself. I stitched onto a white jacket, which I appropriated from somebody. Stitched long lengths of tow. So I was like a shaggy animal with a big hat with shaggy hanging down, and I won the competition. Of course, it was the most imaginative, and I could talk myself into it by saying I'm a Martian missionary. I don't know, some of the people didn't know what Mars was, I'm sure. No, I disrespect them. They were all great people, I think.
Yeah.
There was a guy, they'd had adventures. There was a guy there who had been a sailor and torpedoed during the war and
It
rescued.
made you more. You've been in a competitive environment all your life, and
I'm sorry?
you've been in a competitive environment for many
Yeah.
years, and this
Yeah.
humbled you.
Yes, yeah.
Did it humble you?
No, I took it for granted. I didn't. I assure you, I never felt competitive,
Yeah.
and I don't feel competitive now. And I think that's something that is missing in me. I had, I think I've said this before. Hemingway, asked what genius was, said, to be a genius, you have to have had an unhappy childhood. And I'd had if I thought about it, I'd had a happy childhood, but I didn't think of it as a happy or unhappy. I'd had a childhood with which there were no complaints, which passed by in a smooth manner,
Right.
leaving me untouched.
But it's just you were on a cocktail of drugs then, because I mean, streptomycin penicillin was discovered in the war, right?
Yes,
But George Orwell died of tuberculosis in 1948, 49.
yeah.
So it obviously wasn't early enough for him. But
Well, I think it's likely that my infection wasn't as vicious as George Orwell's.
you were on penicillin.
You see,
from the beginning.
TB could go to your liver and could spread rather like cancer. You could have TB of the stomach. You could have TB of the feet. And I think George Orwell obviously had a chronic case of deadly TB, and he was 40-something when he died.
Were you on penicillin from the get-go, from the start?
Not penicillin,
Well, streptomycin.
streptomycin.
But you were on drugs from the start.
Oh yes,
Right.
from the very start, strep, and the strep Passanina, PAS, whatever that initial stands for, and INAH were the three drugs we had. Streptomycin was the basis of it, and they just changed them around in rotation as time went on. So at the end of this month, we'll give you X amount of PAS, X amount of INA, which is 5% more than last month. That sort of thing. They told you in detail what they were doing with you. And I used to probably why I enjoy staying in bed now is because I really enjoy staying in bed.
Yeah. Do you have any physical remnants of that? I mean, if somebody X-rayed your lung, could they diagnose you as if having
Well, now let's think. No, I've had X-rays of my lungs, and people have said you've got a scar, but it's okay.
Right.
And I was fairly rigorously examined when I left the hospital. I had to go back every month and have an X-ray and all that.
Did you read a lot of books?
Yes, I was reading all the time.
And did you read any tuberculosis literature, like Magic Mountain?
Yes,
You read it when you were at hospital?
I really enjoyed that book.
Yeah.
And also another one called The Rack. Have you heard of
Read
that?
that, yes.
Those were my two favourite books, really. I didn't read them more than once, but I remember them with affection, The Rack, and because it was so near my experience, and The Magic Mountain romanticized my experience and lifted it into the realm of Thomas Mann importance, general literary, high-class literature importance.
Yeah. And it genuinely made sense to you. I mean, he spoke to you, that book,
Yeah.
Hans Castor.
Um,
And did you... but Len caught TB, didn't he?
yes, about 9 months after I got it. But he had a much more mundane time. I was the head boy, if you like, of the sanatorium. Everybody talked to me. They weren't obsequious. They were just friendly. Nobody ignored me. Nobody called me a fool. Because I was interested in them. I was fascinated by them. And I think I told Len, or my mother, this is the first time I've met my fellow class equals.
Yeah.
I saw them as class equals.
Yeah.
I was more educated by happenstance than they were, but still I was their equal.
You felt that they were your people.
They were my people.
And they were all from Staffordshire, or were they from around?
They were all from around.
So what was the name of this sanatorium?
I've forgotten, but I think it was the Stourbridge Serious Diseases Sanatorium, or something like that.
So it was near Stourbridge.
It was there, and you were.
Find it on the map
I remember
today.
clearly. You drove out of Stourbridge, passing Uncle Jim's house. That was Dad's uncle's house. He owned Oakley Brothers, where Dad began his work, over the top of the hill, and then the road down the hill opened up, and there was the Clent Hills, Kinver, with a kind of red rock cliffs, with little houses burrowed into the cliffs. And places to have, marvellous places to have picnics. Not many, of course there weren't many cars around. We had a little Austin 7, Dad bought an Austin 7 just at the end of the war from Uncle Frank. And looked after it very carefully, polished it. I remember I can still smell the polish. And I can still feel the surface of that car. It was beautifully polished.
So the medicine was basically sunshine, fresh air, clean air.
Yeah.
I've seen TB films where they lay people out in the cold in the winter as well.
Yeah.
Wrapped up. Were you laid? Did you have to?
Yes,
lie
they
outside
would put blankets. Every day we were pulled out from the cubicle across the bottom and out onto a terrace. The doors could open wide, and there was a terrace, and your bed was on the terrace. It was better if it was a bit cold, I must say. That's right. And then what we could see, I could see, was the countryside around the Worcestershire, Staffordshire countryside, and just below was one of the pavilions which was a women's pavilion, and they could see through windows at the back. So there were all these women saying "ooh," pulling their shirts up and things. But I never met any of those women, and they were strictly segregated.
So men and women in different parts of the hospital.
Yes, the women were all in the bottommost pavilion, and we were in one of the next one up. I was in the next one up.
Is the building around today?
I'm not sure. I'd quite like if they ever had the opportunity. I'll tell you what happens though. When I go back there, everything seems to be flattened out. The hills aren't so high. Everything seems to be flat. I've noticed that several times when I've gone back to New Village, for example, which I remember is quite a steep hill.
Yeah.
It's no steep hill at all. It seems to be level, New Village. And I've shown you the house, haven't I?
Yeah.
A kind of semi-detached house, Tudor style.
Well, I mean, I visited Granny and Grandad many times.
Yeah. With the Anderson shelter halfway up the garden. But to go back to TB, in later life, people said, "Have you had TB?" I would say yes, and I really enjoy, and I did positively enjoy it. I said yes, I really enjoyed it. I didn't care if they thought I was bullshitting or not. I just did quite enjoy it. because there was a lot of reading, a lot of lying around, a lot of listening to music. For the first time in my life, meeting my class equals.
And also, there's no obligation to work. You couldn't, so you might. You were.
No, there was.
Relaxed.
That's right. No, that's right. And I was paid, in a sense, paid to sleep and eat and read.
Right. And did the state pay for this, or did you have to pay for your own, out of your own pockets?
Yes. Sorry, say it again.
Who paid for your stay?
The National Health Service.
Right, the taxpayer. Okay. So,
It was the primitive National Health Service,
right, okay.
and I think it had already been established. The Beveridge Health Service, I think we called it, and so I was very fortunate to be amongst, in the first half year, a free medical treatment. Up until that point, the unions paid. Most workers were members of unions, trades unions, and they paid a proportion of their earnings percentage to the union. And if they were ill, the union would provide a doctor and pay for the doctor, helping, not necessarily taking all the payment, but making it possible for a working man to pay out of his pension or his sick pay to pay for medical treatment on a sliding scale. And certain doctors, certainly one that Dad used and Mum used, did it for free. They charge, if people could afford to pay, they'd charge. If they couldn't, they did it for free. It was doctors were highly important members of society. Much more than now.
Did you tell people that you'd had TB afterwards?
If they asked, no, I didn't. It wasn't a topic of conversation.
Right.
I think I caught it when I was working for the BBC, because we were in this horrible damp flat.
Yeah. Do you remember where?
And in the last year at Oxford, I remember feeling, when I was rowing, it didn't affect my strength, but I did feel a bit dodgy between races and things. You know, I didn't feel 100% fit.
Do you, well, like they say, you've got COPD. This morning you were a little bit breathless. Do you think that could be a result of tuberculosis, the effects of it?
Yes, I think.
Yeah.
And I think probably my breathlessness now, as you pointed out, might well be an inheritance. It certainly is, of having had, having smoked. That's what the doctors blame mostly, but it's also having had lung disease.
Were you smoking heavily then?
No, I didn't smoke heavily until I started to work in advertising.
Okay. Let's wind up now, okay?
Yeah.
Can you come up with some summarizing marks that can throw it forward into the next phase of your life?
I discussed with Len when he came to visit me in the hospital, and when I finally came out and went to see him in a place called Colindale in North London. He was in a much lower grade type of sanatorium there. We discussed what we were going to do together, and we wanted to get into films, and that's how I got. Although I was 32 or 3 before I got into advertising, I'd been a trainee of the Rank Organisation.
Right. Is that when you became an A&R man for the
yeah, well, I became not so much. I became a creative director.
I know, but you were working in band promotion for a while, weren't you?
Yes, I when I came out, when I felt much better after coming out. This is a relative term. when the doctors told me I was much better from monthly visits after I came out of the sanatorium, I decided to not. I got in touch with the BBC and they offered me a bureaucratic number, which was the same as the one I had when I was left. So I thought, cheeky buggers. I probably caught TB at the overnight at the BBC, and they're not offering me an advantage. So I applied for the rank organisation and got a highly prestigious traineeship there.
Okay, let's talk about that next time. All right.
Okay.